The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound in the room, a monotonous drone that burrowed into my skull. Across the polished table, the man they called the Recalibrator watched me, his eyes holding a depth that felt ancient, like twin wells reflecting a starless night sky. He hadn't spoken a word since I'd been ushered in, his silence a heavy blanket that smothered the air. I was here because my life was a meticulously constructed ruin. Every ambition had crumbled to dust, every relationship had fractured, and the reflection in the mirror was that of a stranger, a hollowed-out effigy of the man I was supposed to be. They said this man, this recluse who lived in the heart of the city's steel and glass forest, could rebuild a man from the inside out. They said he didn't use therapy or medication, but something far older, something silent. "They think they've broken you," he finally said, his voice a low, resonant timbre that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "They believe their noise has deafened your soul, that their distractions have shackled your mind. But a cage is only a cage if you don't know you hold the key." He leaned forward, the intensity in his gaze pinning me to my chair. "The world you see, the one that has beaten you down, is a phantom. It's a projection of the chaos you have allowed to fester within. The war you've been fighting is on the wrong battlefield. You've been battling shadows on a wall, while the real enemy has been inside you, untouched, unheard, and in control." His words landed like blows, each one striking a chord of truth I had long tried to ignore. I had blamed the world, my past, my luck, everyone and everything but the architect of my own suffering. "Your soul needs a recalibration," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a conspiratorial tone that drew me in. "There are rituals, 5 of them, as silent as the turning of the earth, as powerful as the pull of the tides. These are not grand gestures or public declarations. They are the unseen work, the quiet masonry that builds a God-tier mindset, an inner fortress so impregnable that the world's chaos becomes little more than a distant storm." He spoke of a power that wasn't found in the clamor for success or the desperate grasp for external validation, but in the profound stillness of a mastered mind. He painted a vision of a man who moved through the world not as a victim of its whims, but as a silent force, his actions deliberate, his spirit unbreakable. A dangerous ember of hope, something I hadn't felt in a decade, began to glow in the cold emptiness of my chest. What if he was right? What if the prison I was in wasn't a physical place but a state of mind? What if the bars weren't made of steel but of my own thoughts, my own stories, my own fears? The recalibrator smiled, a faint, knowing curve of his lips. He saw the flicker in my eyes, the first tremor of a seismic shift within me. "The first ritual," he began, his voice now a steady, guiding current in the silent room, "is the sanctity of the void. You must learn to fall in love with silence." He described our modern world as a grand conspiracy against stillness, a relentless, cacophonous assault designed to keep us perpetually distracted, overstimulated, and disconnected from our inner selves. We have become, in his words, junkies of the mundane, constantly seeking our next fix of information, entertainment, or social validation. We fear silence because in silence, we are forced to confront the unfiltered truth of who we are. The anxieties we numb with noise, the regrets we bury under busyness, the deep, gnawing questions about our purpose that we drown out with the trivial. The sanctity of the void, he explained, is the deliberate act of rebellion against this tyranny of noise. It is the conscious creation of a sacred space for your mind to breathe, to heal, to recalibrate. He didn't speak of meditation in the way I had heard it before, with chants and complex postures. He spoke of something rawer, more primal. He told me to find a place where I could be utterly alone, without the digital leash of my phone, without the crutch of music or a book. Just me, the 4 walls of a room, and the vast, uncharted wilderness of my own consciousness. He warned me that it would feel like a form of torture at first. My mind, conditioned for a constant stream of input, would revolt. It would conjure a hurricane of thoughts, a maelstrom of worries, to-do lists, and phantom conversations. It would scream for the familiar comfort of distraction. Do not fight the storm, he instructed. Become the eye of it. Observe the chaos without judgment. Watch your thoughts as you would watch clouds passing in the sky. Acknowledge them and let them go. He told me this practice, this deliberate immersion in silence, would act as a crucible. It would burn away the dross of my mental clutter, the accumulated debris of a life lived on the surface. In the stillness that would eventually follow the storm, I would find it. The quiet, unwavering voice of my true self. The source of my inner strength. That evening, I committed to the ritual. I found a spare room in my apartment, a space filled with forgotten boxes and the ghosts of past failures. I switched off my phone and placed it in a drawer, the act itself feeling like a small act of defiance. The silence that descended was absolute, and it was terrifying. As the recalibrator had predicted, my mind erupted. It was a chaotic slideshow of every mistake I'd ever made, every opportunity I had squandered, every fear that kept me awake at night. The urge to flee, to grab my phone and numb the discomfort with the familiar blue light of the screen, was almost overwhelming. But his voice echoed in my mind. Become the eye of the storm, so I stayed. I sat there, a silent observer of my own inner pandemonium. I didn't engage with the thoughts, I didn't argue with them, I simply witnessed them. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, something began to shift. The hurricane of thoughts began to lose its force. The screaming of my mind subsided to a dull roar, then a murmur, and then there were moments of quiet, gaps in the endless stream of consciousness. In those fleeting pockets of silence, I felt a peace that was more profound than any I had ever known. It was not an emptiness, but a fullness, a sense of connection to something deeper, something timeless. It was the first, faint signal of a soul beginning its recalibration. When I returned to the recalibrator a week later, he didn't ask if I had practiced the ritual. He knew. It was in the way I carried myself, in the newfound stillness in my eyes. The noise is the static, he said, picking up where he had left off. But the stories you tell yourself are the frequency you're tuned into. If you want to change the music of your life, you must change the frequency. This led to the second silent ritual, the forging of a new narrative. He explained that human beings are not creatures of logic, but of story. We live and die by the narratives we construct about ourselves and the world. The tragedy, he said, is that most of us are unknowingly playing the role of the victim in a story we didn't consciously write. Our inner monologue is a script penned by past traumas, societal conditioning, and our own limiting beliefs. He asked me to voice the story that had been playing on a loop in my mind for years. I spoke of the man I was supposed to be, the one with limitless potential, and how I had betrayed that promise. My story was a litany of if-onlys and should-haves, a self-flagellating epic of failure and regret. It was a heavy, suffocating narrative that had become my identity. The recalibrator listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, the silence in the room felt different, heavier with the weight of my confessed weakness. That is a powerful story, he said, his voice devoid of pity. It has the power to keep a man in chains for a lifetime, but it is just that, a story, not the truth. You are the author and you have been writing a tragedy. The ritual is to consciously, deliberately, begin writing a heroic epic. He wasn't suggesting I lie to myself or ignore my past failures. He was talking about a radical act of reinterpretation. It was about finding the strength in the struggle, the wisdom in the wound, the lesson in the loss. It was about reframing my past not as a source of shame, but as the training ground that was forging the hero I was destined to become. His exercise was simple in its instruction, yet profound in its application. For every negative, self-defeating thought or story that entered my mind, I was to stop and forge 3 new narratives. 3 alternative interpretations that were empowering, that painted me as the protagonist, the warrior, the alchemist who could turn lead into gold. I started with my most spectacular failure, a tech startup I had poured my heart and soul into, only to watch it implode, taking my savings and my self-worth with it. The old story was one of humiliation, of proving to the world that I was an imposter. Now I forged new ones. Narrative 1, the failed startup wasn't a failure. It was my MBA in resilience, a brutal but invaluable education in the realities of the business world. Narrative 2, the collapse was a necessary course correction, saving me from a path that was not my true calling. Narrative 3, the experience was a crucible that burned away my arrogance and naivety, forging a new humility and strength that would be the bedrock of my future success. At first, it felt artificial, like I was just playing a mental game, but I persisted. Every day, I became the vigilant guardian of my own mind, challenging every disempowering thought, rewriting every victim-centric story. Slowly but surely, the new narratives began to take root. The frequency of my being began to change. I was no longer broadcasting a signal of defeat, but one of emerging power. A strong mind must be housed in a disciplined body, the recalibrator stated at our next meeting, his gaze sharp and penetrating. The path to a God-tier mindset is paved with voluntary hardship. This was the introduction to the third silent ritual, the embrace of the uncomfortable. He spoke of the modern world's obsession with comfort as a seductive poison. We have engineered a life devoid of physical and emotional struggle, a life of climate-controlled rooms, instant gratification, and the avoidance of anything that feels difficult or unpleasant. In doing so, he argued, we have atrophied the very muscles of our character, our resilience, our will. We have become fragile, easily broken by the slightest deviation from our comfortable routines. The ritual was to wage a silent war against this weakness, to intentionally and systematically introduce discomfort into my life. He wasn't advocating for reckless self-harm, but for the practice of what the Stoics called voluntary hardship. It was about choosing the harder path, the one that tested my limits and expanded my capacity for endurance. He told me to start my day with a blast of cold water in the shower, to jolt my system out of its slumber and train my mind to do what is difficult, even when it is screaming in protest. He told me to experiment with intermittent fasting, to learn to sit with the discomfort of hunger, and to master the primal urge for immediate gratification. He told me to push my body and exercise beyond the point of exhaustion, to find the hidden reserves of strength that are only revealed when we believe we have nothing left to give. The first cold shower was a brutal shock. Every fiber of my being wanted to recoil, to turn the knob back to the comforting warmth. But I stood there, enduring the icy cascade, and in that moment of willed suffering I felt a surge of power, a sense of victory over my own weakness. I began to see discomfort not as an enemy but as a sparring partner, a teacher that was making me stronger, more resilient, more alive. I was no longer a slave to my fleeting desires for comfort. I was forging a new relationship with hardship, learning to welcome it as an opportunity for growth. I was becoming, as he had promised, unbreakable. The fourth silent ritual he revealed was perhaps the most subtle, yet it held the power to transform the very lens through which I viewed my reality. He called it the alchemy of gratitude. The default state of the human mind is one of lack, he explained. It is a survival mechanism, hardwired to scan the horizon for what is missing, what is a threat, what could go wrong. In the ancient world, this kept us alive. In the modern world, it keeps us in a perpetual state of anxiety and dissatisfaction. We achieve a goal, and for a fleeting moment, we feel a sense of accomplishment, only to have our minds immediately fixate on the next mountain to climb. We are trapped on a hedonic treadmill, constantly chasing a future happiness that never quite arrives. The alchemy of gratitude was the act of deliberately hacking this flawed mental software. It was about training the mind to see the abundance that already existed in my life, to appreciate the blessings I had so often taken for granted. He instructed me to procure a simple notebook and to end every single day with the same non-negotiable ritual, to write down 3 specific things for which I was genuinely grateful. He stressed the importance of specificity. Not just I'm grateful for my health, but I'm grateful for the strength in my legs that allowed me to walk in the park today. Not just I'm grateful for my home, but I'm grateful for the comfort of my favorite chair and the warmth of the lamp as I read this evening. It felt almost childishly simple, but I committed to the practice. At first, my entries were generic, my mind still struggling to break free from its ingrained patterns of negativity. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to change. I found myself actively looking for things to be grateful for throughout my day. The practice was rewiring my brain, forcing it to scan my environment not for threats, but for blessings. The bitterness and cynicism that had been my constant companions for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of quiet joy and wonder. I was learning that happiness was not a destination to be reached, but a state of being to be cultivated. I was turning the lead of my perception into the gold of gratitude. The 5th and final silent ritual was what the Recalibrator called the art of impeccable presence. Most people, he said, his voice soft but clear, are ghosts living in the haunted houses of their own minds. They are either chained to the regrets of the past or tormented by the anxieties of the future. They are everywhere but here, and everyone but now. We go through the motions of our lives on autopilot, our bodies performing tasks while our minds are a million miles away. We eat meals without tasting them, have conversations without hearing them, live days without truly experiencing them. We are sleepwalking through the one and only life we have. The art of impeccable presence was the practice of waking up. It was about bringing a focused, non-judgmental awareness to the present moment, to whatever I was doing, no matter how seemingly mundane. He told me to anchor my awareness in my senses. When I was eating, I was to pay attention to the colors, the textures, the flavors of my food. When I was walking, I was to feel the sensation of my feet on the ground, the feeling of the air on my skin. When I was talking to someone, I was to give them the gift of my full, undivided attention, to listen not just with my ears, but with my entire being. I chose to begin my practice with the simple act of drinking my morning tea. Instead of gulping it down while simultaneously checking emails and planning my day, I did nothing else. I focused on the steam rising from the cup, the warmth in my hands, the subtle notes of the flavor. In that simple, focused act, the world seemed to slow down. The frantic energy of my mind began to settle. For those few minutes, there were no problems to solve, no future to worry about, only the serene reality of the present moment. As I began to extend this practice to other areas of my life, I discovered a richness and a depth to my experience that had been hidden in plain sight. I was no longer a passive observer of my life, but an active, engaged participant. The Recalibrator had given me the 5 keys, the silent rituals that formed the foundation of a God-tier mindset. But he made it clear that possessing the keys was not enough. The true work was in the daily, consistent, relentless practice. It was a commitment not to a destination, but to a path of continuous self-mastery, of perpetual recalibration. There will be days when the old you, the weak you, will cry out from the depths of your being, he warned in our final meeting. He will beg for the comfort of old habits, for the familiar misery of the old stories. Do not fight him. Acknowledge him. And then, with quiet determination, choose the man you are becoming. I walked out of that room for the last time, not as the broken man who had entered, but as the architect of a new reality. The world outside hadn't changed, but my perception of it had been irrevocably altered. The noise of the city was still there, but it no longer penetrated the walls of my inner fortress. The challenges of life still arose, but they were now met with a calm, unwavering strength. The 5 silent rituals had become the unwavering pillars of my existence, the sanctity of the void, the forging of a new narrative, the embrace of the uncomfortable, the alchemy of gratitude, the art of impeccable presence. This is not a story about magic. It is a testament to the profound, transformative power that lies dormant within each of us. The power to recalibrate our souls, to rebuild our minds, to become the masters of our own destiny. The path is simple, but it is not easy. It requires courage. It requires discipline. It requires an unwavering commitment to the person you were born to be. Now I ask you to look at your own life, to listen to the noise that surrounds you and the stories that you tell yourself. Are you living as the hero of your own epic or as a prisoner of your own mind? The keys are now in your hands. The path is laid out before you. The question is no longer what you can do, but what you will do. The journey inward is the greatest adventure you will ever embark upon. Will you answer the call? I invite you to join a community of individuals who are on this same path. Share in the comments below which of these 5 silent rituals you will begin to practice today. Let us hold each other accountable. Let us share our struggles and our victories. For in walking this path together, we amplify our strength. And if you are ready to continue this journey, to delve deeper into the philosophies of power, resilience, and self-mastery, then subscribe to this channel. The recalibration is not a one-time event. It is a way of life. And we are just getting started. The world may not be ready for the force you are about to become, but your destiny is. The time for living a half-life is over. It is time to build your God-tier mindset. It is time to become unrecognizable.